if we're talking about mindless entertainment that didn't overstay its welcome, well, let there be carnage.
All I ever wanted in this world is carnage.
The first Venom movie sucked. It totally missed the mark. But for this one, I have to at least show it respect. Because it knew exactly what it was, which is a dumb comic book movie as a sequel to a terrible film. And they were like, you know what, people want to be entertained, get them in the cinema for an hour and a half, we'll entertain them, and then send them on their merry way. And I gotta give the film props for that, because in an era when everything has to be over 2 hours, it was surprisingly refreshing to have a dumb comic book movie that I didn't really care about for an hour and a half. It was like the hottest comic book movie of 1999, let me tell you. It was so bad, but I enjoyed it. And I don't know, like I genuinely don't know if they made a film that was like so bad it was good, or they tried and failed miserably. But it was just entertaining. Like it's not good. Let me get that out of the way. But I at least had fun with it, and I was entertained by it. The time flew, and maybe that's because it wasn't a lot of time. But it feels like all the actors were aware of what they were making. Like Woody Harrelson, especially, he just seemed like he knew it was nonsense and went way over the top. The first Venom, if that was good, maybe I would have been disappointed with this one, but it wasn't. So I didn't really care what they did, and because of that, they delivered something that was bad, but it was at least entertaining. It's like it fails as a Venom movie. If you're like, this is what I want from a Venom movie, it fails all over the shop. But it's just like it's a weird buddy cop dynamic in the film. Venom goes to an LGBT celebration at one point and kind of comes out of the closet. Woody Harrelson looks ridiculous, and it's just all a load of dumb fun. I also have to say I loved how abruptly the final fight just ended and made great use out of its one F word in the film. I don't know. It was a total guilty pleasure of a film, even though I don't think I'll watch it again, or at least not anytime soon. But for what it was, I kind of surprisingly enjoyed it in a so bad it's good kind of way. Now, if you wanted to feel like it was 1999 all over again, you didn't have to see Venom Let There Be Carnage. You could also, once more, enter the Matrix.
Billions of people just living out their lives. Oblivious.
Yeah, it's the Matrix Resurrections. It's not, it's not Blues Brothers or anything like that. Those are the only glasses I had. So yeah, this is going to be a tricky one for me, because this is the most recent film I've seen on this list. I only saw it 2 days ago. So my thoughts might be a little bit inconcise. But I did find this to be a bit odd and just a bit of a muddled mess. In my opinion. It starts as like a weird meta commentary on Hollywood and nostalgic reboots. And I think a lot of people will make the same comparison I did, because this film is starting to age like fine wine these days, which is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I think the big comparison people are making is because of the meta stuff, but I think that's a very surface level interpretation, because the difference between New Nightmare and Matrix Resurrections is that New Nightmare had a degree of sincerity to it and also had enough of a meta commentary and approach to sustain its runtime. What we have here is a sort of very sarcastic meta commentary on Hollywood. It's kind of that thing where they're like, boy, isn't Hollywood stupid for doing another Matrix? And then they just do another Matrix. And it's like, well, okay, great. You really showed us wrong. And I don't like, some people are already saying this, and it's going to drive me mad because we're going to get these takes for years, which is that this is some excellent, amazing commentary on Hollywood and reboots and fan culture. And I don't think it is. Because if it is that, it isn't a very successful one, because there's nothing in this film that feels like that's what the goal was. It feels like they wanted to lampshade the idea that this was another Matrix reboot. Like, oh, isn't it so ridiculous they're making the Matrix again? But since we're aware of that, we can get away with actually doing it. And I know there's a lot of talk now that they were going to make another Matrix film with or without the Wachowskis. In fact, they actually say as much in the film, basically. But this was really a case where it felt like they had nothing left to say. Like, one of the things they keep doing in the film is being like, remember how amazing the action scenes and effects were in the original Matrix? don't do that when you don't have any good action or effects in this movie, because there's no innovative action. There's not actually a lot of action at all. And that, again, I'll get into whether that doesn't really bother me in a sec. But a lot of the action is confined to the end and it's not very good. The effects are very humdrum. It's just, really, I mean, honestly, seeing the effects, I was shocked at how much this film cost. It feels like someone did a runner, man, because it definitely shouldn't have cost as much as it did. But I say the action and effects, I can get by on that, because The Matrix has also always been coupled with philosophical ideas. And they've replaced those ideas with shallow satire of the Hollywood system. And that is nothing. I mean, a lot of people are also comparing this to Space Jam 2. And the fact that that is an appropriate comparison tells you all you need to know. It's kind of pathetic that that is the case. And I think the other thing is that while there is some interesting new kind of themes and ideas here, they're not fully explored or engaged with. I mean, there were parts in this film, and they show like what the world has been like since, you know, the original Matrix films, that I was like, man, I actually would watch more of this in this world. But they never really engage with it. Instead, we just get a very standard kind of story that is a sort of inversion of the original to a certain degree with that slightly meta approach. But it's not enough, really. There's not a lot there to make it engaging. And again, the point I'm saying that it feels like they didn't really want to return to this world is something like, hey, the world has changed since the first Matrix came out. Obvious what we're thinking of is, hey, I wonder how they kind of use phones to get in and out of this universe. Phones wouldn't be commonplace if it was a modern world. Surely the Matrix doesn't have phones anymore, which would be a problem for the Resistance, right? Yeah, they can just get out. They can just get out of the Matrix whenever they want. And things like that killed the threat in this movie and just made so that the stakes never really mattered. And yeah, people are saying it's like a love story between Neo and Trinity. And it is, to a certain degree. I think that's certainly kind of the focus of the film. But the other thing is, I never got that vibe from the original trilogy. Like, yeah, they were in love, but it never felt like tender or anything like that. Whereas this film kind of feels like it's retroactively being like, they really love. Wasn't it the best romance ever? And look, I will say it, there is positives to be had. The return of Keanu and Carrie is great. It's great to see them back together, and they still have great chemistry, and it's nice having them in the film. The new characters, I mean, Jessica Henwick as Bugs, I thought she was the best of the new characters. Aside from that, there was, you know, Yahya Abdul-Mateen, who I think he was actually kind of pointless. It really just pointed out that we don't have any more ideas for the Matrix. That has run its course. That we don't need to enter the Matrix anytime soon. And while I do think this was possibly more enjoyable than the sequels for me, just reminded me that there's really no need for any more Matrix, because it feels like the films that it inspired have probably surpassed it by now. This year I also checked out a small indie coming-of-age film.
Ever since I got bit by that spider, I've only had 1 week where my life has felt normal.
Well, here's a movie I thought I was going to review on the regular any good. The biggest blockbuster of the year, and it's got superheroes in it. I mean, how did I miss that one? I caught COVID, is the answer to that question. I had a ticket booked and I had to cancel it. And by the time I was able to get a new ticket, it was nearly a week after it had been released here in Ireland. And, by the time I got to see it, by the way, that does mean that I had to spend a week avoiding spoilers. By the time I was able to see it and, do my review, it would have been like right next to Christmas, and it just didn't make any sense, especially when I was trying to put out other content, like our Christmas special out as well. And because of that, I wasn't able to do a proper review. It just seemed pointless by the time I would have been able to get around to it. I also will say, if I did do a proper review, I would have struggled with the spoilers of it all, because normally I don't do spoilers. And I feel like this is a tough movie to discuss without going into spoilers, but I won't. I'm not going to go into spoilers, don't worry. But since I didn't do a review for it, I've had a lot of people asking me two things, really, which was, is it a good movie? Did you enjoy it? Which to me are always two different questions. Like I just talked about Venom. Is it a good movie? No. Did I enjoy it? Yes. So my answer to this one has always kind of been, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed the hell out of it. And that can sound a little bit misleading, but I think this sort of is the movie Martin Scorsese was talking about when he said films have become amusement parks, theme parks I should say, and because I think this is the example of what he meant. And you could tear into the story of this, you could nitpick it to death, but when you're sitting down watching it, it's so much damn fun that you do not care. It's like, you know, when you get on a roller coaster, you're not expecting some life-changing experience. You're going on it because you're wanting that thrill ride. You're thinking it's going to be great fun. It's a bit of escapism, and you're going to scream your head off with excitement or terror or both. And that's what this film was. I mean, we've seen reactions to this all around now, people whooping and cheering for the return of certain characters and for certain moments. And yeah, maybe it's just because after a few years we've had, it just feels really rewarding. And, you know, I don't want to take away from the film. I think there is some depth to this. I will say it had like a lot more emotional beats than I expected. That really did land. It was darker than I expected it to. And I think this is probably Tom Holland's best performance as Spider-Man, or certainly his most layered. And I will say the same thing for some of the returning villains. I think they were better here than they were in maybe their initial outing. So that's all great, you know. Now, the other thing I should say is that the film felt really big. It felt like a real cinema-going experience. The action was massive, and this felt like, out of the Tom Holland movies, the most Spider-Man-y. That's not a word, Spider-Man-y, but you know what I mean. I do also want to address the fan service elements, because it feels like this year especially I've torn into a lot of films about fan service. Recently, Ghostbusters Afterlife pops to mind. So the question is, why did I turn to those films, and why am I giving this film a pass? And I think it's because this film went beyond just, do you remember this? Remember when this happened? And instead it did what we always wanted, which is it had characters from certain series interact. We've always wanted to see how that situation would play out. It gave us moments where they addressed the questions we'd always had. And because of that, I think it managed to stay true to what the films were, what the characters were, and what the fans wanted. And I'm not going to say there's no hokey moments, but generally I think it managed to avoid empty fan service. Instead, it built on nostalgia and the importance to a lot of people of those films and characters to make a new story, and made it work. And look, I mean, there's not a lot I can say. It's the biggest film of the year. I enjoyed the hell out of it, like seemingly everyone is. Look, I said it's non-spoilers, but I will just say there's a lot of things we all hope for going into this film, and all I will say is that I was very happy with the way things played out in this movie. Aside from that, I mean, I'm just interested to see where things go from here. I don't need to tell you to check out Spider-Man No Way Home, because it's seemingly everyone already has. And now a film I can in no way connect to Spider-Man No Way Home. Tick Tick Boom with Andrew Garfield.
Hello. Hi. Welcome. I'm Jonathan Larson.
Yes, this has been a very musical, Lin-Manuel Miranda heavy year, but I found this one the most interesting out of all of them, because this is one he directed, but it's not his music at all. And I actually, going off this, I'd like to see him direct more things. I think he's got a very interesting creative style, but this is about Jonathan Larson, a musical writer and playwright who created Rent, and he's done the songs for this long ago, because he passed away in the mid-90s, and it was performed on stage kind of before his passing. So this was a very interesting one, because I think it's a tough sell if you don't like musicals, because it's like, hey, do you like musicals? This is a musical about a man who made musicals. Do you like musicals? But I also think it's selling the film short, that to say this is one for the musical theatre kids, because there's certainly a lot of appreciation if you are a big fan of musicals and Broadway. But I think at its heart, it's a very human story here about balancing your life with your goals and ambitions. And I found the movie to be very inspiring and emotional to watch, to be honest. Maybe it just connected with me personally, and I'm sure it will with many other people. This is also probably the best performance I've ever seen out of Andrew Garfield. I was really surprised, especially with his singing, and I do think he's going to get a lot of consideration when it comes to awards season. It was really, really close to put this. I was so close, actually, to putting this in my top 10, but it didn't make it in the end. I think if I made a top 11 or 12, it probably would have been in there. But I think it managed to avoid a lot of nitpicks I have with recent musicals, and if nothing else, they deliver something I felt was a very sincere and stirring piece of cinema. Like I said, Lin-Manuel Miranda had a pretty good year, because he also brought out Encanto.
Mama, why am I the only one that didn't get a gift? You're just as special as anyone else in this family.
This was interesting because it actually did feel a little bit like a stage play, in that it was quite confined in its settings, and I think the story was very simple. And I think by now you can kind of tell when the music has been done by Lin-Manuel Miranda, because it has a certain sameness to it, and that might rub some people the long way, but if you enjoy his music, you certainly won't mind, and I like his music. I will say, much as I do enjoy his music, I think there was only maybe 2 or 3 standout songs in this, but I thought they worked. Visually, I thought the film was very interesting, especially when it was kind of part of the musical montages. I thought there was a real kind of flair to the film when that did happen. And I laughed at once or twice, not too many times. I mean, it was just a pleasant watch, to be honest. I don't think it was that it's going to endure like some of the other Disney animated films, but I will say, you know, it's a kind of a nice family film that I don't really have a lot to say on. And I don't think it reaches the heights of some of their other films, but certainly it was a worthy watch. When it comes to films I don't have a lot to say about this year, I definitely should mention Luca.
Do not go anywhere near the surface. Got it?
Everything good is above the surface.
This is Pixar's latest film. Everyone kind of talked about how straightforward it was. And I think that really is what lent itself to some of its charm. Aesthetically, I thought it was a pretty good film. I don't know, it was just kind of simple and sweet. Yeah, that's it. For me, the best animated film of the year was The Mitchells vs. the Machines.
We're the Mitchells, the only people who can save the world. I'm super sorry, everyone.
Yeah, it was the best animated film of the year. Now that that shit's out of the way, let's talk about Army of the Dead,
Find the safe. This should be a simple in and out.
Zack Snyder's zombie epic on Netflix. This is one of those other films where the premise had me and the execution lost me. I really didn't like this film. I found it to be an absolute slog. And it's a shame because when you hear heist film during a zombie apocalypse in Las Vegas, that ticks so many boxes, but for me it really fell short in every regard. I mean, I know, look, people are going to say I hate Zack Snyder, and I don't. There's a lot of films by Zack Snyder I like, and I think he has great potential as a filmmaker, but I think this really showcased a lot of his bad creative choices. I mean, the characters are really forgettable and uninteresting. Visually, the film was so dull, and I don't know who talked Zack Snyder into shooting with such a shallow focus and super close up to accommodate for that, but they should be fired. I mean, I know he lensed this film himself, but it was a terrible idea. The film looked terrible, honestly, and it's a shame because visuals are an area where he normally excels. I think aside from like the opening sequence, the film as well just looked really, really drab. It seemed like it was more interested in setting off sequels, spin-offs, and future installments. Like, I mean, hey, robot zombies, aliens, whoa. But honestly, I mean, focus on getting the interpretation of zombies sorted first, because I didn't find, you know, intelligent zombies to be all that interesting. I just thought it wasn't very good. It was just a bit nonsensical to me. I mean, also, it felt like the movie was trying to defy our expectations. Like, hey, they give a character a chainsaw, and you're like, oh, I can't wait for them to use that. They don't worry. It was just far too long, and there was not much in it for me. So to be honest, I think you should stay well away from the Army of the Dead. Well, after saying Army of the Dead sucks, I'm sure I'll be getting some death threats from Zack Snyder fans. I guess you could say there'll be those who wish me dead.
Stop! I'm not gonna hurt you. I want to see where the blood's coming from. It's not my blood.
This is Taylor Sheridan's latest film, and I think it's become clear that the Emperor is wearing no clothes, because I didn't see Without Remorse. I heard it wasn't good. I've heard some of the shows are a bit meh now. And this was the worst film I've seen of his so far after loving his previous films. And I mean, it kind of was so bad it made me doubt some of his other work, to be honest. It's just a really slow Western thriller, and normally he kind of caters to your dad as far as the films he makes, I guess, but I can't imagine anyone really loving this movie. Angelina Jolie gave a very good performance as the child actor. Aesthetically it looked alright, it kind of was in fitting with a lot of his other films, but I think in general it just felt like a waste of good talent and resources, to be honest, and because of that, I think it's sort of the poster boy for an average film.
God's gonna cut you down. Tell them that God's gonna cut
you.
Ridley Scott made 2 films this year, and thankfully the millennials got off their phone and Facebook long enough to check out House of Gucci.
I don't consider myself a particularly ethical person, but I'm fair.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think I would have preferred to see Ryan Murphy do this film instead of Ridley Scott. I think it just needed a bit more camp and excess to it, because it felt like a film that was massively at odds with itself tonally. It seemed like some people were told they were making one type of movie, and other people were told they were making a totally different movie. Because it also seems like it was probably pitched as like, oh, it's like a crime epic to do with fashion and, ooh, underworld stuff. But there's not a lot of that in it, and because of that, the movie is surprisingly mundane at times. Like, it's a crime film about greed and fashion, and it's interesting, but very rarely is it exciting. Sometimes it was really dramatic and took itself far too seriously, but then it would also be so ludicrous and comedic in the next scene that it was hard to take the dramatic stuff, the serious stuff, which is the bulk of the movie, very seriously at all. And when I talk about somebody who is in a totally different movie, I have to talk about Jared Leto, who is seemingly making some last-ditch effort to steal Chris Pratt's role as Super Mario from the Mario movie. It's me, Paolo Gucci. How could you do this to Paolo? Like, it's so bad, but it's massively entertaining. Anytime he's on screen, I was like, this is fantastic. This guy is just, he's doing it, man. But the problem is when you put him in a scene with Adam Driver and Lady Gaga, who are doing fantastic work, it kind of takes away from their work a bit. But it also was the highlight of the film, to be honest. It just felt like they kind of hooked you in on the promise of murder and assassination. But they spent so long getting to it that by the time they actually get to it, they're just like, okay, you got that now, the film is over, bye. And because of that, it just feels like the movie is stringing you along, because it really did feel like it was in the need of a tighter edit. It was really long and very indulgent at times. If I was to highlight the positive stuff, as I mentioned, the performances up till now were very good. Also, Al Pacino, I was surprised, gave a very good performance. It's good to see him kind of reinvigorate his career in the last few years with this and The Irishman. What really was a standout for me was the costuming and the hair and makeup. They were excellent, but they weren't enough to make me want to watch this film ever again. Sometimes knowing nothing about a film going into it can really benefit it, and I don't think any film benefited more from that this year for me than Zola.
You want to hear a story about how me and this bitch fell out? It's kind of long, but it's full of suspense.
All I knew about this going into it was like the craziest Twitter thread about a stripper story or something was the way it was billed when the news came out they were making it. And I was just like, okay, cool, I'll wait for the film. And I'm so glad that I did, because this is a crazy film about a stripper who just goes on this dark and insane road trip. I thought this was just a film with style, man. I loved the way it looked and the way it was presented. It was effortlessly entertaining and engaging. The performances were just fantastic and really fearless, especially from our 2 female leads, who must have felt very exposed in their roles, but they just did a great job. I also want to highlight Coleman Domingo's role, who was a character who could just seamlessly turn from charming to psychotic on the turn of a dime, but also he was so charismatic that it was hard to hate him, and yet you did, and I think that's a real compliment to his kind of dual performance. The soundtrack was also really great in the film. I thought it looked great. The film managed to be like intense and entertaining, but also being aware of how crazy everything was. It just had a sort of a dreamlike quality to the whole thing. And it was an insight into a world we don't often see, but it remembered that and brought the audience along for the ride without leaving them behind. If I did have any criticisms, it's probably the fact that it does kind of peter out. It does lose a bit of momentum coming into the end, and it does end very abruptly then kind of out of nowhere, which is a little bit disappointing, but that didn't take away from my enjoyment for the film, and it's another one of those films where I really feel bad for leaving it out of my top 10 this year. And that was the rest of 2021. Some of the other films I checked out this year, but would some of those films have made your top 10? Let me know in the comments below, or do you think that I was totally off on my take? I'd love to hear it in the comments below. Aside from that, we're going to wrap up the year in style on my podcast, Pop Cult Pod, which you can find right here on YouTube. If you do not want to miss out the highs and the lows of the year that was 2021, be sure to press that subscribe button. And of course, I'll be going to my top 10 of 2021. If you don't want to miss it, press that subscribe button. And while you're there, if you did enjoy this video, please give it an old like. Aside from that, I've been your cult leader, Tom Pot. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you on the next one.